Imagine this. You're sitting in your bed, lights dim, maybe with a cup of tea on the side table. The world outside is quiet. And tonight, I'm about to tell you a story. Not a fairy tale with dragons or princesses, but something far scarier and a lot more real. A story about enemies so small you can't see them. Enemies that don't ride into battle on horses or tanks, but hitch a ride on a flea, in a drop of water, or on the breath of a stranger. Enemies that time after time stopped kings, crushed empires, and scared entire civilizations into silence. Yeah, I'm talking about plagues, the great epidemics that shaped human history. Now don't worry, this isn't going to be one of those gloomy lectures where I throw Latin names of bacteria at you and you're left thinking, is this a bedtime story or a biology class? Nope, this is history told with a blanket over your legs and maybe a small smile on your face, even if we're talking about things that once wiped out millions of people. Dark humor is allowed here, so let's set the stage. Why are plagues such a big deal in history? Think about it. Humans built pyramids, sailed oceans, invented math, and argued about philosophy. But all it took was one tiny microbe to bring it all crashing down. No swords needed, just a cough, just a rat, just a sip of bad water. Plagues remind us that no matter how powerful a society thinks it is, nature always has a card up its sleeve. You can have the biggest army, the richest treasury, the fanciest palaces. But if your population starts dropping like flies because of a disease, game over. And that's why, in this series, we're diving into 3 of the most infamous killers of the past: the plague, smallpox, and cholera. Each of them, in their own way, shook the foundations of civilization. But before we zoom in on the details, let's pause and picture what life was like before science came along with microscopes, vaccines, or even the simple idea of washing your hands. Back then, people didn't know germs existed. They thought sickness came from angry gods, evil spirits, or just bad air. Imagine standing in the middle of a city, smelling the stench of sewage, animals, and sweat, and thinking, yep, this must be what's killing us. They weren't completely wrong. The air was pretty bad, but the real killers were far sneakier. Picture being a villager in medieval Europe. One day your neighbor has a fever. The next day, you see black spots spreading on their skin. By the end of the week, half your street is dead. You don't know why. You don't know how to stop it. Priests are praying, doctors are scratching their heads, and some people are whipping themselves in the streets, hoping God will notice their pain and show mercy. Spoiler, that didn't work. Scary, right? But here's the twist. As terrifying as they were, plagues didn't just kill people. They changed everything. They reshaped societies, toppled governments, started revolutions, and even sparked creativity. Some historians say the Renaissance, the explosion of art and science in Europe, was partly born from the destruction of the Black Death. Out of tragedy, new worlds can emerge. That's the strange power of epidemics, destruction and creation, all mixed together. So in this story, you're going to hear about the plague, the OG of pandemics. The one that rolled through empires like a wrecking ball. Smallpox, the killer that came in waves for centuries and left survivors scarred for life. Oh, and it also helped colonizers wipe out entire civilizations. Cholera, the sneaky waterborne disease that taught us a valuable lesson. Maybe don't drink from the same well everyone's dumping sewage into. Each of these isn't just a disease, it's a chapter of human history. And trust me, they're wild chapters. Now you might wonder, okay, but why tell these stories at bedtime? Aren't they kind of grim? Well, here's the thing. Bedtime isn't just for happy tales. Sometimes the most fascinating way to drift off is to listen to the quiet hum of history, even if it's a bit eerie. The world slows down at night, and that's the perfect time to hear how people, centuries ago, faced challenges that would terrify us even today. Plus, let's be honest, knowing that people once thought a mask full of flowers would protect them from the plague. Well, it's kind of comforting to see how far we've come. Imagine falling asleep thinking, at least I don't have to wear a giant bird beak filled with herbs just to go grocery shopping. Perspective matters. And if you ever think today's problems feel too heavy, history whispers back, relax, humanity's been through worse. So tonight, as we begin our journey, let's make a pact. I'll tell the story slowly, calmly, sometimes with a laugh, sometimes with a chill down the spine. You just listen, breathe, and let the centuries roll by like pages in a giant book. Because here's the truth. These plagues are more than medical events. They're human dramas. They're survival stories. They're reminders that even in the darkest times, people found ways to adapt, to fight back, and sometimes to rebuild stronger than before. Think of it as tucking yourself into bed with the ultimate reminder. Yes, life can get messy, scary, unpredictable. But if billions of people before us managed to live, love, and laugh through pandemics way deadlier than anything we've seen recently, then hey, we'll be okay too. So are you ready? Ready to walk through Roman streets littered with the victims of the Antonine Plague? To stand in Constantinople during the reign of Justinian, where corpses piled so high the city ran out of burial space? To travel with traders carrying smallpox across oceans? Or to sit with Londoners mapping out cholera outbreaks, unknowingly inventing modern epidemiology? It's a long road, but don't worry. We'll take it one step at a time. Tonight is just the beginning, so lie back, close your eyes if you want. Forget the noise of today, let history do the talking. Because in this series, the plagues aren't just diseases, they're stories. And stories, as always, are the best company at night. Before we dive headfirst into tales of plagues wiping out empires, let's pause for a moment and rewind. Way back to a time before microscopes, before hospitals, even before soap was a common thing. Because here's the big question: how did people in the past explain disease when they had no clue about germs? Spoiler, some of their ideas were creative, some were poetic, and some were just plain wild. Gods, spirits, and angry curses. Imagine you're living in ancient Mesopotamia around 4,000 years ago. One day you wake up with a fever and can barely stand. How do you explain it? Easy. Clearly a demon has slipped into your body and is messing with you. So what's the treatment? Do you drink water and rest? Nah. You call the local priest magician who comes in chanting, waving incense, maybe sacrificing a goat or two. If you're lucky, the ritual works and your fever breaks. If not, well, at least the goat didn't die for nothing. Egyptians had a similar approach. They believed the gods controlled health, so illnesses were basically divine punishments. If you upset the gods, boom, here's a rash for you. But to be fair, Egyptians also made some surprisingly smart observations. They figured out that cleanliness mattered. They used herbs, honey, and even moldy bread on wounds. And guess what? Moldy bread actually contains penicillin-like substances. Yup, accidentally ahead of their time. The Greeks, balancing the humors. Then came the Greeks, who loved turning everything into philosophy. They thought the human body was like a soup, made up of 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If these were balanced, you were healthy. If not, hello sickness. So if you had a fever, clearly too much blood. The solution? Drain some of it out. Enter the charming practice of bloodletting. Doctors would literally slice you open or use leeches to suck your blood. Imagine going to the doctor with a headache and he's like, "Let's just release some of your life juice." Thanks, Hippocrates. Now don't laugh too hard. The humor theory actually stuck around for over 1,000 years. That's how convincing it sounded at the time. People really believed health was just a matter of adjusting your internal recipe. Bad air everywhere. Another popular idea across different cultures was miasma, the belief that diseases came from foul air. And honestly, if you've ever walked past a medieval street gutter filled with waste, you'd probably agree. It did smell like death. So when plagues broke out, people tried to fight the bad air. They burned herbs, carried flowers in their pockets, or wore those creepy plague doctor masks shaped like giant bird beaks stuffed with lavender. At least the masks looked theatrical, even if they didn't work. Fun fact, the word malaria literally comes from malaria, Italian for bad air. People thought swamps gave off poisonous fumes that made you sick. The real culprit was mosquitoes, of course, but hey, close enough. Ancient India and China, energy and balance. In India, Ayurvedic medicine taught that diseases were caused by imbalances in body energies, or doshas. Too much heat, too much cold, too much wind. Something inside you was off-kilter. Treatments included herbs, meditation, and yes, sometimes purging your body from both ends. Yikes. Meanwhile, in China, traditional medicine revolved around the balance of yin and yang. Health meant harmony, sickness meant imbalance. Acupuncture, herbal teas, breathing exercises, all aim to restore flow. And while some practices sound mystical, many remedies actually had measurable effects. Ginger for nausea still works today. When in doubt, blame the stars. Astrology wasn't just for horoscopes in the newspaper. Back then, people believed the stars controlled health. If Mars aligned with Saturn in a funky way, boom, plague time. Doctors often carried charts of the sky alongside their medical tools. Sorry, the stars say you're doomed. Talk about bad luck. Community responses, fear and rituals. One thing was universal though. Whenever disease struck, fear followed. Imagine entire villages panicking because no one knew who'd be next. That fear shaped behaviors. In some places, people isolated the sick outside city walls. In others, they held massive processions, praying for divine mercy. Ironically, those processions often spread the disease even faster. Oops. And sometimes the blame game kicked in. Outsiders, minorities, or sinners were accused of bringing illness. Scapegoating was almost as common as coughing. What they got right, by accident. Now, before we judge, let's admit they weren't completely clueless. A lot of their superstitions had a grain of truth. Washing, burning herbs, separating the sick, all of these accidentally helped reduce disease spread. They just didn't know why it worked. It's like trying to fix your computer by smacking it. Sometimes it works, but not because you understand the software. Why this matters. So why are we spending time on these ancient beliefs before diving into the big epidemics? Because they explain the mindset. When the Black Death rolled into Europe, or when smallpox hit the Americas, people didn't react with science. They reacted with fear, prayer, and guesswork, and that made the impact even worse. It also shows us something deeper. Humans have always tried to make sense of suffering. Even without microscopes, people asked the same questions we still ask today. Why me? Why now? How do I protect my family? In a way, that's kind of comforting. Across centuries, across continents, people wrestled with the unknown in the best way they could. So as we step into the next chapters, where plagues crash into empires, you'll see these beliefs in action. You'll see priests leading prayers, doctors with bird masks, astrologers pointing at the sky, and terrified families clutching flowers as they walk through empty streets. They didn't know about germs, but they knew about fear, and fear shaped history just as much as any microbe. So tuck in a little deeper. The real storms are just beginning. All right, story time. Let's travel back almost 2,000 years to the height of the Roman Empire. Picture wide stone roads, marble temples gleaming in the sun, bustling markets with traders shouting in Latin, and legions of Roman soldiers marching in perfect lines. Rome was basically the superpower of the ancient world. But here's the twist. The biggest threat to this mighty empire didn't come from barbarians at the gates. It came from something invisible, something that slipped quietly into the city and brought emperors to their knees. This is the story of the Antonine Plague. A mysterious arrival. The year is around 165 CE. Roman legions are returning from campaigns in the east, victorious, tired, and ready for wine and celebrations. But along with trophies and stories of battle, they bring back something else, something they don't understand. At first, it's just a few soldiers falling sick, fevers, chills, weakness. Then the symptoms get worse. Boils and sores spreading across the body, diarrhea, coughing fits, sometimes death within days. Soon it's not just the army, it's the cities, families, entire villages. Historians believe this was either smallpox or measles. But to the Romans, it was simply the plague. a curse from the gods, and it spread like wildfire. Life in the shadow of disease. Imagine being a Roman citizen at the time. One week, your neighbor is laughing and drinking at the tavern. The next week, he's lying pale and unrecognizable in his bed, covered in sores. The smell of burning incense fills the streets as families try to purify the air. Priests are offering sacrifices, but nothing changes. People keep dying. Reports say that in some cities, thousands died every single day. The streets filled with funeral processions. At one point, so many bodies piled up that proper burials became impossible. Just pits, mass graves, and silence. And here's the scary part. It didn't just happen once. This plague dragged on for about 15 years, with waves of death hitting the empire again and again. The human toll. Some estimates say up to 5 million people died. That might not sound like much compared to today's world population, but back then it was devastating. Entire communities shrank. Villages vanished. Fields went untilled because farmers were gone. The empire's backbone, the people, was cracking. And let's not forget the army. Rome's soldiers, once invincible, now fell faster to disease than to enemy swords. Campaigns were abandoned. Borders became weaker. The mighty Roman machine started to stutter. Enter the philosopher emperor. Now here's an interesting twist. The emperor at the time was Marcus Aurelius. Yes, that Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, the Stoic thinker whose writings are still quoted today. Picture him sitting in his tent, writing calm reflections about fate and duty. While around him, the empire is literally dying from plague. Marcus himself caught the disease, but survived. His co-emperor, Lucius Verus, wasn't so lucky. He died, probably a victim of the same plague. For Marcus, it must have been surreal, trying to guide an empire while death was everywhere, from palaces to slums. How people reacted. So how did Romans deal with this? Religion went into overdrive. Temples were packed with people offering sacrifices, praying to any god who might be listening. If one god didn't work, maybe another would. Superstition spread. People whispered that the army had angered foreign gods during campaigns. Others said it was punishment for moral decay in society. Doctors were clueless. Roman medicine still revolved around humors and balance, so treatments included things like bloodletting or strange herbal mixtures. None of it really worked. And of course, fear ruled everything. Families abandoned sick relatives, some towns locked their gates, trade slowed down because nobody wanted strangers carrying disease into their markets. The ripple effects. Here's the thing, plagues don't just kill people, they shake systems, and the Antonine Plague did just that. Economy. With fewer workers, food production dropped, prices went up, the empire's wealth shrank. Military. Rome's armies grew weaker and enemies noticed. Germanic tribes and Parthians tested the borders. Suddenly, Rome didn't look so untouchable. Society. Fear of death changed how people thought. Some turned more religious, searching for comfort. Others became fatalistic, saying, if death comes tomorrow, why follow rules today? In a weird way, the plague didn't just take lives, it shook confidence in the empire itself. The idea that Rome was eternal, unstoppable, blessed by the gods, started to feel fragile. Echoes in history. Think about it. We often imagine great empires falling to epic battles, dramatic betrayals, or foreign invasions. But sometimes history turns because of something as simple as a fever. The Antonine Plague may have been one of the first dominoes that set Rome on a slower path to decline. Not the only cause, of course. Rome had plenty of problems, but definitely a heavy blow. And yet, there's something deeply human in this story. People 2,000 years ago faced the same fear we recognize today, the fear of an invisible enemy. They didn't understand it, they couldn't control it, but they lived through it, adapted, and carried on. The human face of it. Let's end this chapter by imagining a small scene. A Roman father tucks his children into bed in a quiet villa on the edge of the empire. The mother leaves herbs burning by the door, hoping the smoke keeps the plague away. In the distance, funeral drums echo from the city. The children ask, Will we be safe? And the father, holding back his own fear, just says, "The gods will protect us." Did they survive? We'll never know. But we do know the empire itself survived, for a while. Because even in the shadow of death, life went on. Markets reopened, soldiers marched, philosophers wrote, Rome stumbled, but it didn't fall, not yet. And that, my friends, is how one mysterious plague, carried home by victorious soldiers, managed to humble the greatest empire of its time. So, ready for the next act? Because if you thought this was dark, wait until we step into Constantinople for the plague that almost killed a dream of resurrecting Rome itself. Close your eyes for a second and picture the city of Constantinople in the 6th century. It's massive, glittering, the pride of the Byzantine Empire. Huge domes rise above the skyline, merchants are yelling in dozens of languages, spices from the east fill the markets, and the empire feels unstoppable. At the center of it all, Emperor Justinian, the man with a dream, to restore the glory of Rome. He had armies reclaiming lost lands, laws being written down in books that would last for centuries, and grand churches going up. Yes, Hagia Sophia, I'm looking at you. Things were looking good, really good. And then the plague arrived. A stranger at the gates. It started in Egypt, likely carried along the busy trade routes of the Mediterranean. Ships carrying grain also carried something much smaller. Rats, and on those rats, fleas, and inside those fleas, a tiny bacteria called Yersinia pestis, the same one that would later cause the Black Death. When it hit Constantinople in 541, nobody had a clue what was happening. At first, a few cases. A fever here, a swollen lymph node there. Then the numbers exploded. Within weeks, tens of thousands were sick. Symptoms that terrified everyone. People developed sudden fevers, chills, and the trademark buboes, those large, painful swellings in the armpits and groin. Some victims turned black as their tissue died. Death often came in just a few days. It was brutal, fast, and terrifying. Imagine walking through the streets. One man is alive in the morning, by evening he's gone. Entire families vanish within days. Survivors avoid even touching clothes or furniture, convinced everything is cursed. Death on a massive scale. Now here's where it gets staggering. Contemporary sources claim that at the height of the outbreak, up to 10,000 people were dying every single day in Constantinople. 10,000. Even if that number was exaggerated, we're still talking about an apocalypse-level disaster. Bodies piled up so fast that cemeteries overflowed. Gravediggers couldn't keep up. They started throwing corpses into mass graves or even into the sea. Ships left harbor full of grain, and also full of rats, spreading the disease further. The city, once buzzing with trade and laughter, fell eerily silent, broken only by the sound of funeral carts. Justinian Falls, Illinois. And here's the dramatic twist. Emperor Justinian himself caught the plague. The most powerful man in the empire was suddenly just another patient, lying in bed, feverish, close to death. He actually survived. Lucky him. But his recovery didn't change the fact that the empire was crippled. His dream of restoring Rome put on pause, if not shattered. Armies couldn't march if soldiers were dead. Cities couldn't pay taxes if citizens were gone. The plague didn't just kill people, it stalled history. How people explained it. Remember, nobody knew about bacteria or fleas. To them, this was divine punishment. Priests called for prayers, processions, sacrifices. Others blamed foreigners or the sins of the city. Some just gave up, assuming the end of the world had arrived. Superstition ruled. People burned incense, carried charms, or locked themselves indoors. None of it really worked. The plague came for the poor and the rich alike. The aftermath. By the time the first wave ended around 542, historians estimate that 25 to 50 million people across the Mediterranean world had died. Maybe half the population of the empire. Think about that for a second. Half, gone. Imagine whole villages wiped off the map, fields empty, trade routes abandoned, a sense of doom hanging over everything. The empire survived, yes, but weaker. Justinian's dream of reuniting the Roman world never fully recovered. Some historians argue that without the plague, the Byzantine Empire might have expanded further and shaped Europe very differently. Instead, it struggled on, scarred and diminished. Daily life in the plague. Let's zoom in on a small scene. A baker in Constantinople wakes up, kneads his dough, and waits for customers. None come. The market is empty. His neighbors are dead or too afraid to leave their homes. The baker himself coughs, feels a pain under his arm. By nightfall, he's gone. Multiply that story by thousands, and you see the human face of the Justinianic plague. Not just numbers, but lives, families, dreams, all erased. A glimpse of the future. Here's the chilling part. This plague wasn't a one-time event. It came in waves, returning for centuries. Each time it reminded people that death could appear at any moment. It shaped how they thought about life, faith, and fate. And it also set the stage for something we'll see again in history. How a single disease can reshape the destiny of entire civilizations. A bit of perspective. We often think of history as the story of great leaders, epic battles, brilliant inventions. But here's the humbling truth. Sometimes it's the tiniest creatures, the bacteria in a flea's gut, that decide the fate of empires. For Justinian, the plague was a nightmare he couldn't conquer with armies or laws. And for the empire, it was the moment when the unstoppable machine suddenly slowed, creaked, and nearly broke. So as you lie back tonight, imagine the grand city of Constantinople, the mosaics, the palaces, the bustling harbors, all falling silent as a plague spreads through its streets. A reminder that even the brightest civilizations can be dimmed by something invisible. And yet humanity endured. Somehow, through loss and grief, people carried on. Because that's what humans do.